At Christmas, my brother hit my son for playing badly, and Dad called it just a slap. Now he's watching the police handcuff my brother in court. I'm going to tell you precisely what happened. I am Adam Walker, a 39-year-old architect residing in Portland. I'm a single father parenting my 13-year-old son Noah, following my divorce from Claire 4 years ago. We reside in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, and I've set up a little studio area to work from home. Noah received first place in his school's music competition today for an original song. This was the culmination of years of continuous work and weekly treatment sessions. I couldn't help but feel proud as I saw my kid carry that Taylor guitar on stage. Driving home, I saw Noah marveling at the tiny prize. Even if today was a win, I knew my kid still remembered what occurred at my parents' Christmas gathering nearly 3 years ago. And it all began because my family was envious of my children's skill. At that point, I recognized that severing ties with a portion of my family was still the correct thing to do, no matter how difficult. Almost 3 years have gone, and each day I have to remind myself that not all blood connections are worth keeping. In December 2024, I promised to attend the Christmas party at my parents' home in Portland. It had been more than a year since we last saw the family, and my mother had frequently reminded and asked me to bring Noah to family events. When we traveled to my parents' comfortable house on the afternoon of December 24th, I could feel Noah's joy mingled with worry. Noah was just 11 years old. The child gently clutched his Gibson guitar, occasionally touching the instrument case affectionately. Before exiting the car, I glanced at my kid and softly said, "If you're uncomfortable, please let me know. We can leave at any time." Noah nodded, smiled weakly, grasped my hand and whispered, "I'll be fine, Dad. I want to play guitar for Grandma." The tension was palpable from the moment we came in. Brandon and his wife Karen sat in the living room beside Patrick, Brandon's best friend and business partner. Tyler, Brandon's kid, was next to them, wearing his normal bored face. My mother ran to welcome us with a fake grin. She held Noah tightly and excitedly added, "I've been waiting for you for so long. I heard you received a scholarship from the Portland Music Center." Before Noah could respond, Brandon sarcastically spoke up from the living room, "So, the family's musical prodigy has arrived." The entire world should pause to listen. When I heard that, Noah stiffened next to me. I softly squeezed my son's shoulder, signifying that everything would be okay. The Christmas celebration was placed in a forced environment. Brandon couldn't stop talking about his business accomplishments and the million-dollar contracts he had recently negotiated. Patrick continued to echo him, becoming a pair that made the air suffocate. Meanwhile, Noah sat silently, periodically looking at the guitar in the room's corner. I knew the boy was thinking about the opportunity to perform, and that was the only reason he agreed to come here. After dinner, as everyone was getting ready to distribute gifts, my mother clasped her hands and joyfully announced, "And now Noah will perform a song for us." I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. When Noah heard her statement, he glanced up at me with worried and excited eyes. I nodded encouragingly, and the boy took a timid step forward, snatching the Gibson guitar from the corner of the room. I saw Noah's little fingers quivering as he sat on the living room chair. My kid took a deep breath before beginning to play the song he'd been preparing for weeks, a rearranged version of Silent Night with traditional themes. The first chords boomed out, and everyone fell silent to listen. My mother beamed brightly, and my father stopped drinking to pay attention. Karen nodded gently in time with the music, while Tyler gazed at Noah with curiosity. Only Brandon and Patrick exchanged strange stares, occasionally snickering as Noah missed a note. I tried not to pay attention to them, instead focused on the growing confidence on my son's face as he grew more into the song. I had no clue that in a matter of seconds, my kid and I would be subjected to a planned attack in the home where I was born and reared. When Noah approached the peak, Brandon stood up and waved his hand, signaling a halt. The entire living room went into shock. Brandon exclaimed in a loud, disdainful voice, "Playing this horribly, and calling this a prodigy?" After Brandon's comments, my heart tightened as I saw Noah's face blanch and his small fingers freeze mid-chord on the strings. The abrupt attack left everyone in the room astonished. My mother opened her lips to say something but couldn't. Karen drew Tyler into her arms to shelter him from the uncomfortable atmosphere. After a moment of astonishment, Noah raised his head, his voice shaky but clear. Noah said, "This is the song I won 3rd place in the music competition a month ago, Uncle Brandon." Following Noah's remarks, Brandon's face flashed with astonishment, which was swiftly replaced with wrath. His eyes got crimson, most likely from the booze. Brandon moved quickly and smacked Noah hard across the face. The smack was so abrupt and powerful that the instrument crashed to the floor, and my kid was flung to one side. Fresh blood emerged in the corner of my son's lips. "You don't talk back to me," Brandon yelled, his voice booming around the quiet room. In that moment, time appeared to stand still. I felt my body freeze, unable to accept what had occurred. My heart broke as I watched Noah curl up, one hand clutching his cheek and the other attempting to reach for the guitar that had just fallen to the floor. Brandon moved forward before I could react, taking the Gibson from Noah's quivering hands. He raised the instrument fiercely and crushed it hard on the floor. The sound of shattering wood echoed like a sad cry. The Gibson guitar, my grandfather's final present to Noah, was now splintered into bits. The guitar strings broke and coiled, the body burst apart, and the headstock nearly came apart. I completely lost control when I saw that scenario. I lunged at Brandon, losing all reason and everything but the knowledge that he had injured my baby. My fist flew right for Brandon's face. And when it struck its target, I felt his nose cartilage snap beneath the power of the initial strike. Brandon lurched backward and was unable to react before my second blow hit his jaw. I felt the punch so hard that my knuckles ached. Brandon slumped on the floor and began moaning. The wrath hadn't subsided. I hurried forward to continue, but Patrick stepped in to help. Without hesitation, I turned and punched Patrick in the stomach, causing him to topple over, his face distorted with pain. In that moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I glanced at Patrick and became angry than ever, recalling how he stood there smiling as my son was being hit. I sighed. That's for standing there laughing when my son got hit. Brandon staggered to his feet, blood streaming over the carpet and soaking his white shirt. He lunged at me, his eyes filled with hatred. We collided violently, tumbled sliding on the floor, fists flying everywhere. Fortunately, my father and other guests swiftly interfered, separating us. I strained to get free, my gaze never leaving Brandon's enraged expression. Brandon, despite being held tightly, yelled, "I will not forgive you. You're going to pay for this." Hearing those warnings sent chills down my spine. I looked at my kid, Noah, who was still seated on the floor, eyes wide, observing the crazy scene. The youngster was not sobbing, most likely due to shock. My mother immediately hurried to Brandon's side, using a handkerchief to stem the blood from his nose. Then she turned to me, her eyes full of blame and terror, and said, "Adam, how could you beat Brandon like that? Have you lost your mind?" I tried to relax, knowing that my son needed me now more than ever. But the fury had not faded, and I couldn't help but respond to the obvious partiality. I immediately pointed at Noah, who was shivering, then at the broken parts of the instrument, and growled word for word. Brandon struck my kid and smashed the guitar Grandpa Henry gave him. "And you are worried about him?" My father, who had now joined my mother and Brandon, shook his head, clearly disappointed, and stated coldly, "Adam, you always overreact. It was just a light slap, and that old guitar can be replaced." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took out my phone, my hands quivering slightly from rage, and stated coldly, "Fine. I will call 911. Allow the police to determine if assaulting a kid and destroying property is a minor offense." Brandon's eyes widened with concern as he realized that I was about to contact the police. He stared at my parents with desperate eyes. My parents exchanged glances, and my mother walked toward me with a concerned attitude saying, "What are you doing, Adam? This is a family company, and we can run it from home." I looked down at Noah, who sat with the smashed Gibson guitar scattered about him. I felt my heart ache when seeing the scenario. Then I said, "My son was hit until he bled. This isn't family business anymore." I then dialed 911. But before I could push the call button, my father interrupted, his voice harsh and threatening. "If you make this public, Adam, you will no longer be family. We've had enough of your unstable personality." Those words struck me like a cold water. My father had just openly chosen Brandon rather than safeguarding his own grandchild. The guy I had always admired had just told me that, in his opinion, my son was less important than family reputation. I looked around the room and noticed Karen's averted gaze, Patrick's unmistakable enjoyment, and Noah's expression. My youngster needed medical treatment and had to leave this poisonous atmosphere immediately. With uncommon composure, I gazed into my father's eyes and said, "With parents as biased as you two, I'd rather be an orphan." After that, I hit the call button and the 911 dispatcher's voice echoed out in the room, lowering the tension. "Call 911, what is your emergency?" I maintained eye contact with my father as I said, "I need to report an assault on a child. My 11-year-old kid was recently struck, has a bleeding mouth, and need medical treatment. We also need police." Brandon then leaped up from his chair and lunged at me, as if to seize the phone, but my father intervened in time, pushing him back. My father's face was pale. Realizing I had crossed the line, I supplied the location to the 911 operator, who stated that police and an ambulance were on their way. After hanging up, I approached Noah and cautiously assisted him. The kid shivered in my arms, his face still etched with the handprint and blood at the corners of his lips. "Let's go outside and wait for the ambulance, son," I replied gently, attempting to instill warmth and safety in my terrified youngster. I knelt down and picked up the Gibson's most important pieces, particularly the headstock with Grandpa Henry's name etched. The rough wood pieces sliced into my palms, but the agony was nothing compared to the wound on my heart. At this time my mother walked closer, her eyes alternating between fear and wrath, and murmured, "What have you done, Adam? Do you realize this will harm the family's reputation?" I stared at her with an unusual remoteness. The mother who had given birth and reared me now appeared to be a stranger. I shook my head and responded simply, "No, Mom. Brandon damaged this family by hitting an 11-year-old child." When we stepped outdoors, everyone went quiet. I hugged Noah tightly as I stood on the porch, waiting for rescue. The youngster glanced up at me, his eyes filled with dread and terror, and said tremblingly, "Dad, what will happen to us?" I kissed my kid's forehead and comforted him. "We'll be okay, son. Promise." After what had happened that day, I was determined to protect my son at any costs. While we waited for the police vehicle and ambulance, I was reminded of Grandpa Henry, the first person to see Noah's potential and teach him to play guitar. Noah was 7 years old when he unintentionally touched Grandpa Henry's guitar at a family gathering in the summer of 2020. It was an average guitar, not costly, but full of memories from his youth. My grandfather quickly spotted Noah's small fingers brushing on the strings. Unlike the customary reaction when children touch people's property, Grandpa Henry smiled encouragingly and softly asked Noah, "Do you want me to teach you how to play a song?" Following that offer, Brandon's scornful voice boomed out from the kitchen. "Another artist in the Walker home. Noah is undoubtedly going to design structures that no one wants to build, just like his father." When I heard that remark, my wrath rose up. But before I could reply, my mother swiftly interrupted. "Brandon, don't say that. Your brother has a stable job." Brandon shrugged and sarcastically responded, "Stable? Claire wants a divorce since Adam is unable to pay for the family. That's what happens when you pursue false desires." At that point, my heart squeezed with agony. Brandon always knew how to stab my wounds. It was true that Claire and I were going through a tough time, but not for the reasons he mentioned. We had progressively grown apart as two persons with distinct aims and dreams. While the acrimonious debate continued in the kitchen and living room, my grandfather carefully showed Noah how to hold the guitar and play simple notes. After about 30 minutes of practice, Noah was able to play a basic tune. That night, when we returned to our modest apartment and prepared for bed, Noah sat on the bed, staring at me with gleaming eyes and exclaimed eagerly, "Dad, I want to learn guitar like Grandpa Henry. He said I have talent." I paused for a while, looking into my son's eager eyes. In our poor financial condition, with our marriage on the verge of dissolution, I questioned if I should pursue another costly pleasure. But then, witnessing Noah's uncommon delight after weeks of grief caused by mine and Claire's friction, I chose to invest in my child's desire. When I took Noah to guitar lessons a week later, teacher Sarah looked at me with understanding eyes and gently said, "Music can be a safe refuge for children during difficult periods in life, Mr. Walker." Hearing those words, all I could do was nod in response, hoping that this decision would bring some good into my son's turbulent life. Grandpa Henry's health quickly worsened in the spring of 2022. End-stage lung cancer gave him little time. During his hospital stay, the once strong guy became a feeble shadow on the bed. When I brought Noah to see Grandpa Henry one April day, he was too weak to sit up. However, when he spotted Noah, his eyes brightened. He made a faint gesture for me to move closer to the bed. After I crouched down, Grandpa Henry said softly, "Adam, bring the guitar case from the closet at my house here. I have a present for the child." The next morning, I took an old guitar case to the hospital. When I opened it, I found a vintage Gibson J45 from the 1970s. This was his most cherished instrument, which he had never allowed anybody else to touch. When he noticed the instrument, Grandpa Henry smiled faintly and waved Noah closer. Then he strained to say, "This guitar is yours, Noah. I've been playing it for the past 42 years. Music gives you a voice that no one can take away." Noah's eyes widened in surprise. He gently caressed the guitar with the reverence of a 9-year-old boy and whispered tearfully to his grandfather, "I promise I'll take really good care of it." After Noah's words, Grandpa smiled pleasantly and looked at me thoughtfully. I understood what he was trying to express. This was more than just a guitar. It was a link that connected generations, his method of passing on his love of music. A month later, Grandpa Henry died in his sleep. He left a surprise in his will, in addition to dispersing the majority of his possessions to his children and grandkids. Instead of Brandon, I received the modest wooden cottage near Cedar Lake, where Dad used to create music. Brandon erupted in rage when the lawyer read this section of the will, then snarled, "What? That mansion is worth at least $500,000, and it was handed to Adam, who has made no contributions to the family company." My mother swiftly grabbed Brandon's hand, attempting to calm him down with the words, "Son, that was Grandpa's wish." After Mom's comments, Brandon snatched his hand away, looked at me with malicious eyes, and cruelly muttered, "Always Adam, right? Grandpa's spoiled artist grandson." In that stressful moment, I chose quiet, not out of fear, but because I knew no words could heal Brandon's resentment and bitterness that had grown over time. Later, when I brought Noah to the lakeside house for the first time, he uncovered a hidden treasure. Henry's musical sketches and composition notebooks spanned several decades. Those yellowed sheets included musical notes as well as a man's ideas, feelings, and life philosophy after spending his whole life juggling responsibilities and passion. When we were sitting on the ancient wooden floor reading his words, Noah looked up at me with watery eyes and quietly whispered, "Dad, I feel like Grandpa Henry is still here with us." Hearing those words, I felt a rush of emotions. I drew my boy into my arms and held him tightly. In that moment, I realized that my grandfather's actual legacy was not the home or the guitar, but his love of music and the freedom to pursue his passion. Something he was now passing on to Noah, skipping 2 generations who had completely lost the genuine purpose of life. Brandon and I's relationship was never one of harmonic brothers. Brandon had always been the ideal child in my parents' eyes. He was a worthy heir to Walker Construction, a 3-generation family-owned construction enterprise. I recall a family gathering when I was 18, and I had just stated that I wanted to pursue architectural design rather than construction management. My father smashed his fist on the table and furiously said, "What? What about art architecture? That is not how you make money." Brandon chuckled coldly at Dad's comments, then said, "Just let him chase his pipe dreams. Dad, he's never got what it takes to operate the business like we do." Meanwhile, my mother remained silent, her eyes troubled, but she did not dare to speak out against her husband and elder son. Only Grandpa Henry, who stood by me, lovingly caressed my shoulder and murmured, "You should do what you love, Adam. Life is too short to live according to other people's wishes." Brandon continued to mock me despite the fact that I had graduated from college and began working. At a Christmas dinner a few years back, when I had just received a job to design a local art center, Brandon lifted his wine glass and then laughed bitterly, saying to the entire table, "Come on, let's raise a toast to Adam, my brother, the architect who builds things nobody wants to invest in." In front of the entire family, I suppressed my rage and gently finished my wine. Claire grabbed my hand beneath the table, her eyes appearing to say, "Don't pay attention to him." When Claire and I's marriage began to fail, Brandon seized the opportunity to turn my suffering into a comedy. During a phone chat with my mother, I overheard him remark, "I previously informed Mom that Adam is too much of a dreamer. How will he provide for his family? Claire should have married a realistic man like me." Hearing those remarks made me want to rush into the room and strike Brandon in the face. Instead, I left the house in quiet, knowing that a strong reaction would only intensify the situation. I had decided to follow passion above family custom, at the cost of a relationship with a brother that I would most likely never be able to restore. While I was still caught up in old recollections, police cars and ambulances came at the end of the street. At that moment, I felt a mixed combination of relief, fear, and melancholy. But I knew I'd done the right thing by protecting Noah and forcing Brandon to face the consequences. 2 cops, 1 male and 1 female, came out of the first patrol car. They rapidly analyzed the situation. The female police approached us, and the male officer proceeded inside the home. Medical staff from an ambulance also approached. A woman approximately 32 years old dropped down to Noah's level, smiled sweetly at him and said, "Hi baby. My name is Emily. Can I look at your injury?" Noah nodded slightly as the physician checked the cut at the corner of his lips. She carefully cleansed the scrape, blotted away the dried blood, and studied it properly. After the inspection, the medic looked at me with expert eyes and said, "Nothing serious. Small scrape that will heal within a few days. We will clean it and apply an antibacterial bandage." The female cop approached us after the medic had done her work. She took out a little notebook, looked directly at me, and stated, "My name is Officer Carter. Can you tell me what happened?" I remained cool and delivered the facts. Officer Carter made detailed notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. She then turned to Noah, leaned down to my son's level, and softly said, "Can you tell me what happened?" Noah looked at me, as if seeking encouragement, before returning to the police officer and sheepishly recounting everything in full. Officer Carter jotted down Noah's statements before standing up and said, "I need to photograph your son's injury and the guitar pieces for evidence. Do you agree?" I nodded in agreement, and she took out a digital camera, taking numerous shots of Noah's wound and the shattered Gibson guitar. Inside the home, I noticed the male cop speaking with Brandon, my parents, and the others. They were gathering statements from all witnesses in accordance with established investigative procedures. After approximately 20 minutes, the male officer stepped outside and spoke quietly with Officer Carter. Then they both approached us. The male cop stared straight at me, his demeanor serious and professional, and stated, "My name is Cop Davis. We've spoken to everyone inside. This looks to be a major situation. According to state law, we must report any complaints of child assault to Child Protective Services, who will conduct their own investigation." Officer Carter stepped by her colleague, opened her notepad, and said, "Based on what we've learned, there are adequate reasons to arrest Brandon Walker for assault on a juvenile and deliberate property destruction. However, you will need to come to the station to file the formal report, and may be required to appear in court if the matter proceeds to trial." I nodded, recognizing that the legal process would be complicated and time-consuming. Then I boldly said, "I understand. I want to pursue this case." Officer Davis went to the home, but Officer Carter remained with us. She closed her notebook and carefully stated, "We will transport your brother to the station for formal interrogation and processing. You and your son must both attend in order to finish the report. If you'd like, we can arrange for a social worker to assist your kid with this procedure." I was appreciative for their professionalism and understanding, so I answered simply, "Thank you, officer." I believe it would be extremely beneficial to Noah. A few minutes later, Officer Davis walked Brandon out of the residence. He wasn't shackled, but he was obviously being detained. Brandon glanced at me angrily as he was escorted to the police car, but he didn't say anything. My parents then walked out, their expressions pallid and anxious. My mother approached us, grabbed my hand and said, "Adam, can't you do this for the family? What about your parents' reputation?" When I looked at my mother, I felt really sorry. I understood her anguish, but I also knew what I needed to do. I looked down at Noah, saw the mark on his cheek, then returned to Mom and softly stated, "Mom, I'm doing this just for family, for my little family, Noah. If you don't grasp that, I can't assist you." My father, still standing at a distance, glared at me with hard eyes and forcefully remarked, "If you continue down this path, Adam, you will no longer be a member of our family." Those remarks were unpleasant, but I was psychologically prepared for the reaction. I glanced at Dad one more time, feeling strangely calm, and said, "Then that's your choice, not mine." Officer Carter suggested we accompany the second patrol car to the police station. Noah calmly glanced out the car window as he drove there. After a time, he turned to me, his eyes filled with concern, and softly inquired, "Dad, are we in trouble?" I placed my hand on my son's shoulder, hoping to express warmth and protection. Then I boldly said, "No, son. We are not in peril. It's not always easy to do the right thing, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't." Everything at the police station seemed professional and well organized. Rachel, a social worker, arrived to work with Noah. She smiled pleasantly and introduced herself. "Hi, my name is Rachel. I'll be working with Noah while you finish the report paperwork." Rachel brought Noah to a child-friendly interview room, while I was escorted to a separate room to meet with the officer in charge of the case. When I finished the papers, I was taken to the room where Noah sat with Rachel. The youngster appeared exhausted, but calmer. Rachel rose up as I arrived and said, "Noah has been courageous and cooperative. We've discussed what happened." Rachel took me aside briefly, out of Noah's hearing range, and gently stated, "Noah provided extensive reports of the occurrence and his emotions. We'll follow up on this case to ensure he receives adequate help. I urge that you get him a therapist to assist him handle this incident." I was appreciative for her attention and professionalism, so I said, "Thank you for everything you've done. I'll surely take your advice." When we left the police station, it was already late. None of us had anticipated Christmas to end the way it did. We went into a nearby motel since we were too fatigued to drive home that night. In the motel room, I set the shattered parts of the Gibson on the table. Noah remained on the bed for a long time, staring at the parts before looking up at me with sorrowful eyes and saying, "Dad, now that Grandpa Henry is gone, the guitar is gone too. Is there anything left to recall Grandpa Henry?" That question caused my heart to ache. I sat alongside my son, held him in my arms and said, "Emotionally, Noah, we have memories. The teachings Grandpa Henry taught, the songs he played, and most importantly, the music in our hearts. No one can take that away." That night, as I watched Noah fall asleep, I realized the path ahead would not be easy. There would be legal processes, difficult encounters, and emotional scars that need time to heal. But I also knew I had made the correct decision. Noah became deeply depressed in the days following the tragedy. He refused to touch any musical instruments, even when I offered to purchase him a new guitar. Noah eventually expressed his true feelings during a therapy appointment with Dr. Cooper. When the doctor gently inquired why he no longer wanted to play guitar, Noah fell into tears and cried, "I don't want people to dislike me anymore. I don't want to be hit anymore." Hearing those words, my heart broke into pieces. After the appointment, Dr. Cooper approached me and really stated, "Noah is going through a lot of trauma. The child lost more than just his favorite guitar. He also lost his sense of safety and self-confidence." I couldn't get away from my strong feelings either. Every night I chastised myself for endangering my son. I wondered myself why I had agreed to go to the party. Why did I not identify the warning signs? Worse, did my angry reaction to Brandon set a negative example for my son? During a private appointment with Dr. Cooper, I shared these ideas. She listened intently before responding. "Mr. Adam Walker, guilt is understandable in this scenario, but you must recognize that the true criminals are those who inflicted the harm. You behaved like a father defending his child, like any parent would. However, those consoling remarks did not totally alleviate my shame and failure. I pledged to protect Noah, but I failed." Noah continued to see Dr. Cooper for treatment in the coming weeks. He gradually began to open up, sharing his anxieties and sense of loss. In one therapy session, the child remarked, "I miss Grandpa Henry's guitar, but I'm scared that if I play guitar again, people will laugh at me." Hearing those comments from Dr. Cooper, I recognized the road to recovery would be long and difficult. But at least Noah had begun to confront his anguish, rather than keeping it deep inside. And then, one day, as I was working in my modest studio, Noah came at the door. The youngster stood for a long time, staring at the design sketches on my desk. Then he requested quietly, "Dad, may I look at Grandpa Henry's music drawings again? The ones at the lake house?" Hearing that query, my heart raced with a gleam of optimism. After weeks of stillness, Noah finally suggested music. I smiled at my kid, attempting to control my emotions, and softly said, "Of course, son. This weekend, we'll go there." I noticed a faint light in Noah's eyes, the first indication that we may, just maybe, make it through the storm. Brandon's trial began 3 months after the Christmas night event, following a comprehensive investigation by police and prosecutors. That day, I chose to go alone, leaving Noah at home, since I did not want my child to see the individuals who had mistreated him that day. Claire, my ex-wife, volunteered to care for Noah. Despite being divorced, we both prioritized our son's interests above anything else in this scenario. I came in court early, dressed in the most formal suit I possessed. When I walked into the courtroom, Brandon was already sitting with his lawyer. He appeared thinner and more worried than the previous time I saw him. Behind Brandon, my parents sat with several relatives, all dressed professionally as if for a funeral. The trial moved rapidly and seriously. The evidence was plainly presented, including images of Noah's injuries, bits of the shattered Gibson guitar, and witness testimony. When asked to testify, I described the events in full and honestly, attempting not to allow my emotions take control. Brandon and his lawyer, on the other side, attempted to establish that it was a spur-of-the-moment reaction with no intent to injure. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and their defensive attempts failed to persuade anybody. The verdict was issued after due deliberation by the judge. Brandon was convicted of child assault and malicious damage of valuable goods. The punishment was announced: 5 years in jail and $195,000 in restitution. Brandon erupted in rage as he heard the judgment. He pointed at me and said, "Are you happy now? You have wrecked my life. You're not my brother anymore." Court authorities acted immediately to detain Brandon. The judge slammed the gavel, demanding order in the courtroom. After Brandon calmed down, the judge began to explain the compensation specifics. The antique Gibson guitar from the 1970s was valued at $45,000. The remaining $150,000 was Noah's recompense for the psychological harm and treatment fees he had to bear. The judge also addressed me harshly, saying, "Mr. Adam Walker, although the court understands your reaction in that scenario, I must warn you that violence is not a solution. You're lucky you don't face charges for beating your brother." I nodded, accepting the judge's admonition and knowing he was correct. Brandon needed to be punished, but my aggressive reaction was not an appropriate one. When the trial concluded and Brandon was brought away, I felt a mix of relief and despair. This was not the desired conclusion for my family, but it was necessary to safeguard Noah. When I walked out of the courthouse, I was greeted by people from my family. My mother, her eyes red from sobbing, stared at me with sad eyes and asked, "Adam, what have you done? You've placed your brother in prison. Our family will never be the same." Before I could respond, my father walked forward, his expression hard and icy. He stared into my eyes and stated, without emotion, "I told you, Adam, you're no longer a member of this family." His words slashed directly through my heart, despite my mental preparation. Hearing such comments from my own father's voice was excruciatingly distressing. Soon after, several of my family began to criticize me. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, shook her head in sadness and asked, "How could you do this to your brother? To your family? What were your thoughts, Adam?" Uncle Frank, my father's brother-in-law, said, "Taking family matter to court contradicts fundamental beliefs. Family handles family problems. You've brought dishonor to the entire family line." I stood there silently, enduring the onslaught while knowing in my heart I had done the right thing. Noah, my kid, needed to be protected, and justice given. Just as the situation turned heated, cousin Olivia arrived near me. Olivia stood between me and my outraged family, whom I had not expected to support me. Olivia glanced at those who were condemning me and stated firmly, "Enough. Brandon struck an 11-year-old child and ruined a family relic. He earned the punishment. Adam did the right thing by protecting his son." Uncle Steve, my father's younger brother, walked behind me and stroked my shoulder. He gazed into my father's eyes and said, "I have always admired you, but this time you are mistaken. If someone hit my grandchild, I'd do everything to defend him." Adam did nothing wrong. More surprise, Olivia's husband, Mark, who seldom intervened in family matters, also stepped out. I believe we should pause and ask ourselves what is most essential. That is Noah's safety and pleasure. The boy has suffered enough. This unexpected support touched me. People stood with Noah and me even when they were in the minority. After acknowledging their assistance, I shook hands with each individual, thanked them, and then departed. When I drove home, my head was spinning from all that had transpired. I had lost a member of my family, but I also received support from individuals I never anticipated. Most importantly, I had safeguarded my kid and ensured Brandon faced the repercussions of his conduct. When I got home, I discovered Noah playing guitar in the living room, with Claire alongside him. The beautiful melody of the tune the child was playing on his new Taylor guitar relieved my grief. Claire glanced up as I went in, her eyes filled with curiosity. I nodded slightly, indicating that the trial had concluded and justice had been served. She smiled sweetly and moved up to give Noah and me privacy. Noah stopped playing when he noticed me. The boy's eyes were filled with concern. "How did everything go, Dad?" he inquired quietly. I sat beside my kid, gently placed my arm around his shoulder and said, "Son, Uncle Brandon will have to face the consequences of his actions. He won't hurt you again." Noah leaned on my shoulder and said nothing for a long time. The youngster then stated in a little but firm voice, "I'm not happy Uncle Brandon has to go to prison, but I'm glad he understands you can't hurt other people." The maturity in Noah's statements astounded me. My kid, while being just 11 years old, recognized something that many others in my family did not. This wasn't about vengeance or separating the family. It was about setting limits and teaching consequences for bad behavior. In that moment, I understood that despite having to sacrifice a part of my family, I had made the correct decision for Noah, our future, and in some ways, Brandon, who needed to learn to accept responsibility for his actions. When Claire was about to go, she paused at the door and softly remarked, "Adam, I'm proud of you. Not everyone is willing to do the right thing when it is difficult." I bowed in gratitude, unable to respond. Despite my losses, I had discovered new allies. More significantly, I had discovered the inner strength to safeguard what was most essential to me, my kid and my trust in justice. It's been nearly 3 years since that terrible Christmas night and the trial that followed. Noah's and my life have gradually established a regular routine, albeit with some significant upheavals. We're still in Portland, in the original flat, but the space has a new significance. It is a secure haven. The castle we constructed together. Brandon is still in prison, and I'm not interested in hearing about him anymore. Following the trial, I broke off all communication with my parents. The decision was difficult, but Noah's peace of mind was very important. Noah is currently 13 years old and recuperating well. The youngster has fully returned to music, even joining the school band. The Taylor guitar I purchased to replace the Gibson has become his constant companion. I still find him glancing at the shattered bits of the Gibson we stored in a little glass box, not to instill melancholy, but to serve as a lesson of strength and perseverance. However, during the last 3 months, my mother has resurfaced. She frequently arrives abruptly at our house, with tiny gifts for Noah or handmade cookies that my kid used to like. I've always refused to let her see Noah. I wish to stop her contact with her grandson, not because I haven't seen any evidence that she realizes her faults. I'm still unhappy with them, not just for what occurred on Christmas night, but also for how they responded afterwards. They didn't care about Noah's wounds or how he was feeling. Instead, all they cared about was family honor and keeping Brandon safe from the repercussions of his conduct. Now I'm at a crossroads. One side is splitting off completely, possibly going to another city to prevent unexpected encounters. The other side is addressing them, emphasizing the harm they did, and insisting that they respect our limits. Half of me wants Noah to get to know his extended family, but another half wants to shield him from individuals who haven't demonstrated they deserve to be in his life. Do you believe I should address my parents, speak openly, and insist that they quit troubling our lives? Should I remain silent and then covertly go to another place, starting over from scratch? Sometimes the most difficult judgments aren't right or wrong, but between two options with a cost to pay. I want the best for Noah, so he may continue his healing without being held back by previous wounds. I hope you can advise me on this critical decision.